we go. Here we are at this very interesting time here, the 18th of December of 2020. And right now, both Jupiter and Saturn are entering into Aquarius. And here on the solstice, there's going to be a conjunction, a relatively rare conjunction, because they are so close together. I'm going to be sharing a couple things here on screen. So just a second here. Can you all see that? Oh, I can't see you. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, very good. I'm going to make a slight change with that, but I'm glad to have this opportunity to share at this very important time. I'm going to take a look at a couple of different options here.
Yes.
Okay, good. So here's my contact information. The topic here, wrapping up the years, peeking into the future. This has been such a year, 2020. And well, there's going to be some things I'll say about that, but I'm sure that throughout the whole year, all of us astrologers have been sharing ideas and looking at some of the different ways that astrologically this shows up. But I have come across a couple of different things because I'm astrologically, because I'm very interested in mundane astrology. And I love patterns and mapping out those patterns that shows up historically that, again, one can see in the sky, one can see here. And so the topics, as promised, we'll see if I can do it, and I'm promising to speak as quickly as possible to get through a couple of different interesting points here. Yeah, we just had this solar eclipse recently, just this last Monday, the 14th. Here it was in Sagittarius, 23 degrees Sagittarius, I believe, close to the south lunar node, and that has a specific emphasis here on what also happened on the 14th, which is the electors got together, kind of wrapping up the election, as it were. And then I will be taking a look at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, of course, coming up here later on, and that's on that winter solstice. But I cannot go any further unless we have a little look backwards upon what has transpired here in the past. So here's the rest of the program tonight. A quick look back on the 2016 election. I was there at the, in person actually, in Asheville in 2016. I think it was May. And by that point, they had just discovered that Donald Trump would be the only candidate here. So there was only one Republican, but we still had Bernie and Hillary in the running at that point. And many of you perhaps were also there at that time. I had a couple of different things to say about that because I found in retrospect there were some interesting alignments there that I wasn't exactly seeing at the time, but they certainly were there. So, as promised, just a quick glance, not too long, but just something very interesting and special about the election 2016, because we're still dealing with a bit of that here today. And I have been using this particular chart. I'll show you a couple of different things with the 4th of July, 1776 chart. And I've been using this for more than 25 years, and I've been using this 2:19 p.m. time in Philadelphia. I can go into greater details about how I got that, but I came across two separate books by non-astrologers, but historians who were writing about the Continental Congress, and they both said sometime after 2 p.m. Here is the chart that I have been using. This is the US chart, And you have seen some other variations, including the Sagittarius rising chart or the Gemini rising chart. Well, this one here I've been using is a 8 degrees Scorpio rising. And I'll bring up a couple of different things about that as we go along. But I'd like to have you take a look here first, here in the third house, more towards the bottom, and just note that in 1776, Pluto was at 27, Capricorn 33. Just keep that little number in mind because we're going to come across it in an interesting way. 4 years ago, I used this very same image with all of these specific details in that talk, and I was looking over here recently and said, well, take a look at that. What we were, of course, dealing with and what I was really paying attention to was the Uranus in Aries, and that came in 2010, but really quite strongly in 2011. In fact, many of you may or may not know that in March of 2011, when Uranus definitely came into Aries to stay for those classic 7 years, on the day before it hit 0 Aries, there was an earthquake off the coast of Japan. And then remember, that's water in Pisces. Then came a tsunami that then the next day, on the 11th, there was that tsunami that hit the nuclear power station in Fukushima. I mean, we're talking about exact, when the planet Uranus went into Aries fire sign. And we're still dealing with that, of course, today. I was looking at the election here as one individual, and I'll let you guess who, was representing the Uranus in Aries personality, squared up against a Plutonian in Capricorn. And those were like the two biggies, as it were. And we had talked about not only these two, but also Hillary was in the works. And then what we had in our meeting back then was looking at all the different charts and looking at the inauguration dates and the pros and cons and the transits and so forth. And then we all had our own little election. And sure enough, it looks like Bernie Sanders won the election. But the Asheville group didn't sway the whole country, unfortunately. And so we had the other opponent here representing Pluto, a Plutonian, a plutocracy in Capricorn. And that was the square off. And even though I've got all of these this data here in front of me, and they were there calculated at that point, I wasn't paying so much attention to Saturn in Sagittarius that was squaring Neptune in Pisces at that time. And it turned out that Hillary became the Saturn in Sagittarius. And that was kind of a quarterback call by the DMC, and the baton was given to Hillary. And when you're talking about a Saturn in Sagittarius versus a Pluto in Capricorn, we know who won. I'd like to also add that the progressions for the US chart from 1776, and I again will show you a couple of things here soon about that. The progressions ascendant went into Leo, and when it goes into one of these signs, it'll be there for approximately 28, 29, 30 years or so. So not a quick thing. And it just went into Leo, a fire sign, in April of 2016. And then at the same time, then the progressed USA moon went into another fire sign, Sagittarius. And so if we compared even all three of the candidates at the time, Bernie and Donald and Hillary, well, who has got the most fire? Done deal. Okay, I wanted to point towards something going even further back, but I wanted to share with you some of the reasons why I have been using this 219 or this Scorpio Rising USA chart for a long time now. Here is the Battle of Fort Sumter. This is when it began, and this was back in 1861. Of course, there was lots of rumblings as soon as Abraham Lincoln won the election in the fall of 1860. And that was officially like the beginning of the separation between the North and the South. But this was when the guns started to fire. And so that particular date, the attack on Fort Sumter, is the official date of the start of the Civil War. You just looking at the transits here, take a look over here at the 7th house, and over here on the right-hand side, and then you will see Pluto at 8 degrees Taurus. Interesting coincidence. Then another interesting thing here is that Uranus takes about 84 years to go around the zodiac, and here we find Uranus back at where it was in 1776. They're in the 8th house, 9 degrees, just less than 1 degree away from that exact conjunction. But the spark and the guns and the firing of cannon was right there, found with the trigger there at Mars, moving up towards that conjunction of Uranus. There are, this is one very interesting chart that I think kind of points towards, well, there may be some validity here with this Scorpio rising chart. And 84 years later, after this, was in World War II. And so the US was again at war when Uranus is in the 8th house. And we will know that not too long from now, Uranus will again go back into Gemini, because right now it is in Taurus. Here is another chart that I use just to, say something about this Scorpio rising chart. These are the progressions. And as you may or may not know, progressions are calculated basically 1 day equals 1 year. And so 10 days from one's birth time would be 10 years. And so that's kind of how they are calculated. So this one here just has the secondary progressions. And I would just have you take a look at just the progressed midheaven and ascendant there on the outer rings. The inner rings are the US chart. And the big thing, the big interesting thing for 9/11, the 11th of September of 2001, take a look there in the 5th house at where the progressed midheaven is. And it would take 360 years, of course, for that midheaven to go around the zodiac. And there it was at 0 degrees Aries, 0. And kaboom, the US will not be the same. In the meantime, take a look up in the 9th house on the secondary, and then we have the ascendant at 18 degrees Cancer. And you can see that it was squaring the progressed Mars also at 18 degrees at that very same time. Just a couple of different things, taking a look backwards and seeing some of the reasons why I have been using this. So here we are now, 2020, and just a little symbol of some of the fun that we've had. I take a look at the conjunction here of Saturn and Pluto, and I'm sure many of you astrologers have already calculated this and looked at it again, recognizing, and I have to be careful about this myself, that so often here in the United States, we are looking at the charts as it deals with the United States. Whereas I lived in Europe for many years, and so got used to like saying, oh, so this is of course set for Washington, D.C. exactly at that point. But, in Europe, you could be making it for Berlin, or calculate it for Rome, or off to Japan and calculate it for when did this exact aspect happen in Tokyo. So it just will depend on, it'll change the houses, as it were. But this is where it was set for last January the 12th, 2020. And we're talking about, of course, the pandemic. We're talking about 2020, the economic crises, and so forth, all kind of there promised in this complex chart. You'll see up there in the ninth house, and bear with me if you've already looked at this chart over and over again, because I wanted to point out just a couple of different things. I'm not going to go so much into detail, but a couple of different things I find very unique and interesting here. The sun, of course, is at 21, almost 22 degrees Capricorn. And then very closely, you know, we've got the asteroid Ceres. Then we've got, of course, the magic, the reason why that chart is calculated in the first place, and that is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction there at 22 Capricorn 47. And then very, very close to that, less than a degree away also, is Mercury at 23 Capricorn. I mean, what an intense focus that is. And so when one takes a look at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction there almost a year ago, I'm not just isolating it and just looking at those two planets, but it's all really closely marked there together. And I would also have you notice that it's in the third decanate of Capricorn, and every element is divided into those three decanates, decan meaning 10. And so the first 10 degrees of Capricorn would be ruled by Capricorn. The second 10 degrees of Capricorn would be the second earth element after that, which would be Taurus. And then the third decanate, or from 20 to 30 Capricorn, that would be then the Virgo decanate. And even though this is a classic Capricorn conjunction, and we're talking about world economic shifts, changes, it's a Virgo decanate, and so it is a health-oriented crisis. And indeed, that is really true. Ceres is also in the mix, adding to that. Something else interesting here. We have got the Leo. Remember, this is set for Washington, D.C. So the Leo moon there in the fourth house is squaring the ascendant descendant, and there was a lot of drama and strong opinions connected by the people, because in more of a national or a mundane chart, the moon represents the people in general. And yeah, squared up, and protests and people complying and not complying, as well as, you know, it is, you know, fun Leo, and there's been many funny jokes in cartoons. I'm sure many of you have shared some of them. Dark humor, of course, you know, connected to a crisis, something not so funny, but people do it anyway, don't they? Up in the ninth house, back up there, long distance travel was also hit, especially the airlines and cruise ships and so forth, and as well as some things going beyond the other things that one would take a look at. In, again, the US chart, the ninth house could also be higher legal court cases. And indeed, last winter, Donald Trump was impeached, and then there was a fake trial, and lots of ceremony and discussions, and then frustrations. But again, that's right there. I mean, ninth house in Capricorn, there with Saturn and Pluto. Here's a couple of images, again, from our year. And I would have you notice here that the corona, it's called the coronavirus, of course, And here is on the left-hand side a picture of a corona and part of an eclipse. And if we take a look again back at the chart that we were just looking at, you'll see that the north node is down there in Cancer, in the third, the south node up there in Capricorn. So just like 2 days before, there was a lunar eclipse. So it was an eclipse season during that time, and how interesting that that is connected to then a corona sign. Again, what a important picture, what important image that is, you know, in a fire, probably in California, with the sign down below saying, you know, wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance, stay safe in the midst of a fire, a conflagration. Again, I take a look here back at the Virgo decanate again, and I would have to say, you'd have to agree with me, that this country has never been so clean. Same thing for the world, sanitized, and of course all of the masks and the rubber gloves, I mean, as if we all worked in a hospital. Very Virgo, very perfect that way. Pluto comes into the dynamic here too, and what's the deal? Remembering now, as I slightly back up, you know, Pluto ruling Scorpio, the reproductive system and the elimination system. What's the deal with the toilet paper? But also quite perfect here for Pluto in this unusual year. So yes, we have survived it, barely. Some of us not, in fact, many not. And one can say that the world will never be the same. Again, many different responses to what has happened, both, you know, looking at things from philosophical perspective, humor, frustrations, politics. And remember, it's way beyond the United States. This is a worldwide pandemic, 2020. Again, back here looking at that chart, I had you also pay attention to where Pluto was in 1776. And you might remember that it was 27 degrees Capricorn, 33. And take a look here. Remember, this is a chart set for the exact aspect for Washington, D.C., okay? And the midheaven right there, the numbers at the very top, 27 Capricorn, 35. Oh my goodness. I believe, especially when you take a look at the conflagrations, the fires in California, the West Coast, also in 2019, you know, this started before 2020. In fact, it's called Corona 19. Yeah, all kinds of things that we were seeing beforehand was, you know, prophesied, let's say, by this chart. And I'd have to say that the US has already started its Pluto return. Some of the things that we can really take in, from here, and I'm going to kind of keep this image here in front of you for a minute or two, and but very thoughtful analyses and things connected with, you know, to be good neighbors, conscientious to people. Remember that that alignment was in the 9th house, and one can wax philosophical about things, but of a pragmatic nature in earth signs Capricorn, decanate Virgo, of how to be with each other. How are we going to connect with each other? How can we be good neighbors and citizens? And again, this is way more than what was happening in the United States. If we take a look at the really big picture over here on the right-hand side, here we have cartoon here of the beat up Mother Earth. Thanks for the break. And, you know, little rascal COVID, you know, you think they understood? Well, there was a lot more talk in the spring about all of the different wonderful things that happens when humans, you know, kind of back off from all of the consumerism. And remember all those images, discussions, news items, you know, about clean air. The smog had disappeared. Water was being cleaned up. It was really quite a hopeful time. Because as you also recall, back in 2019, young Greta Thunberg was going around the world as a young ambassador talking about climate change. And when are those adults going to act, you know, responsible and kind of stop all of this? And at the time, I thought the same thing too. I thought, boy, good luck with that. But yeah, in the springtime, early on in this catastrophe, yeah, humans did back off. And there was a lot of really good news connected with, wow, you know, we don't need to be out and about. We don't need to buy. I mean, so many interesting things connected with that, and how quickly Mother Nature recovered. So all very impressive, all of that. And this, of course, this particular conjunction connected with an illness that came basically, now there's, you know, there's been a little bit more discussion about it, you know, like what really is the origin, but for a long time, and still in my thinking, you know, we had the markets, the wet markets in China, Wuhan particular for this, and a lot of, let's say, unclean conditions for animals there being bought and sold. Even endangered species were being bought and sold there in, again, unclean conditions. And I believe it was also the SARS, which was another COVID illness here in 2001, 2002, was also started in the wet markets in China. So we have a trend there. But the big thing here, and again, back to Virgo, ninth house in that chart, yeah, we have to think about the animals. We're not the only creatures here upon the earth, and treating Mother Nature well, and thinking about, you know, what are we going to leave here for the children and grandchildren, many different lessons connected to that. But as far as who was affected most strongly, the conjunction, of course, was in Capricorn, and classically, Capricorn is connected with the elderly. Let's go back a bit to other Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, and I'll go back a little bit more than 100 years. And there was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Cancer, and that was in 1914 and 1915. Of course, that coincides with the First World War. And Cancer kind of pointed towards my clan, my nation, my turf, and all of the belligerents, mostly in Europe, were colonialists. You know, they were expanding their empires, and they wanted just more piece of the earth, and there was probably, everybody was equally guilty in that war. And so here we have now the conjunction there in Cancer. It really is one of the indicators, you know, of that First World War. And then, because things were moving slower there, I mean, they were still using horse and buggies. There were some, of course, early cars and tanks and so forth. But yeah, they used a lot of animals. Also, unfortunately, died on the battlefield. And it took a while. They have since done some research and found maybe in 2016, 2017, instances the Spanish flu. Good, I'll go back to sharing the screen, but also, talking about that Saturn-Pluto alignment going back. And as Cancer is classically connected to the mother and therefore childbearing age, then that is a age group connected to late teens and into the 20s. And one of the interesting things about the Spanish flu was that it was hitting that very age group. And that made it especially unusual because it's usually the very young or the old or the infirm who usually gets ill, but it was those in their 20s. And unfortunately, those were the same people who were part of the war itself. I have a feeling that there was a lot of battle weariness there, a lot of lots of like psychological pain and so forth. And then when the war ended, there was more people who died from the Spanish flu than from World War I itself. I think it was like 40 to 50 million people. Really a terrible thing. We're, and relatively speaking, even though this is early, we're pretty lucky about that. So then we go around the cycles and come again to the Saturn-Pluto alignment. And here we have now the conjunction was in 1947, and that was in Leo. And when you think of Leo, I think oftentimes of school teachers, elementary school teachers, and so forth. And so which population was affected by a mass pandemic at that point? And it was called infantile paralysis. And so that is polio. And so it was a crisis at that point, late 40s. And then the breakthrough came, with the polio vaccine. I think it was in 1953. Do another cycle, still with the Saturn-Pluto thing, and now we're into 1982, and it's in Libra. And in that particular pandemic, it's connected to a Libra type of thing, or a relationship-oriented illness. And of course, that was the start of AIDS. So we have now got a pretty clear pattern so far of what dire straits comes when these two big heavy hitters come into town. So we move on from there. Okay, we can talk more about Saturn and Pluto, but we're looking at some elections here also. And the election 2020, it was looked at by many people here, as a, of course, with great excitement, with trepidation, recognizing that, again, now looking at just the US, our country is again divided, and more so than I must admit, in my many years of living here in the United States, it's really quite divided. There's probably several reasons for that, but we won't get into that here right now. One thing I noticed, however, was that Mercury changed its directions on Election Day there in early November, just a month and a half ago. And I recall that same thing happened in the year 2000. Mercury, 3 times a year going retrograde and then direct. It happened to go direct on that day during the elections. And also, like the year 2000, it wasn't so clear, who was going to win, and there was going to be contentions, and it did turn into debates. And in the 2000 election, it wasn't until sometime in I think December, that finally the Supreme Court stepped in and gave the election to George W. Bush. And that perhaps was part of the hope and thinking here by some Republicans this time, that the same thing would happen. But as we know, we really didn't know. I mean, there was lots of back and forth, about what was going on. It did seem a few days later, not on election day, but a few days later, that Biden had won. But there were many people who said, no, that's not true. But again, astrologically, Mercury just changed directions on that day. No big surprise to me and to other astrologers. However, it was only just less than a week ago here on Monday, December 14th, and that happened to be a total eclipse, but it was the official day of the electors getting together to confirm if indeed they were going to go with what was decided previously by calculations by state elections. And on that day, on this total eclipse day, they did decide to say, yes, the numbers are right. Biden is the president-elect, and it seems to be a done deal at this time. I do know that there are still some people protesting that, but I find it also interesting that they're on the total eclipse, and that means that it was close to the South Node eclipse at 23 degrees Sagittarius. And if I were looking at somebody's chart and I see, a sun-moon conjunction, close to the South Node, I would say, we've got some issues here that we have to discuss, perhaps some past karma, because I take a look at the South Node associated with karma, as well as how one interacts or responds positively or negatively to one's society. I really do take a look at the nodes for that. And so again, past karma, looking into the past, grumblings, perhaps the feelings of stuck, all of that there was revealed on that day. And of course, on that day, it happened to conjunct Trump's moon. He was born on a full moon. And by the way, the interesting thing, probably you astrologically know this, but he was born here with the sun conjunct the planet Uranus, which is very much into techno gadgets, in Gemini of communications. And what is he really, really known for as far as communication is his tweets through Twitter. So I've always found that very humorous that, yep, it certainly does show up there astrologically. But again, being born on a full moon, that moon was opposite sign over in Sagittarius, and this particular eclipse was right on that moon, probably taking the wind out of his sails. The Sabian symbol is always an interesting thing to take a look at. I know that there are other types of symbols that one has used, but I think maybe one of the original ones was that created by Mark Edmund Jones. He did it, he worked with a psychic, I think her name is, Elsie Wheeler, and he put this together. He got together with this very gifted psychic in 1925. And then they just spent some time together, and she intuited or got symbols for each of the 360 degrees of the zodiac. And from there came the Sabian symbols that they're called. And interestingly enough, it was, they did this in 1925, but 28 years later is when he published the Sabian symbols. Very interesting, and I kind of wondered what that slowdown was about, but that's part of the history. Anyway, this particular eclipse point, 23 degrees Sagittarius, for the recent total eclipse, the Sabian symbol is a bluebird standing at the door of the house. I couldn't find anything specific for that except with this cartoon, and then it kind of made sense to me. I don't have Twitter, so I had to find out, through other people exactly what that little bluebird meant. And here we are now, post-elections, and there is much talk about conciliations and getting together and let's let bygones be bygones and move ahead. And that again is more a part of this Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn in this pandemic year of 2020, where a lot of things are revealed.